We introduced ourselves at the beginning, so we won't take any more time, but we will introduce ourselves as things go on. And we'll now hear from the second presentation, Cambridge Systematics.
All right, well,
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I'm John Kaliski, principal of Cambridge Systematics and the project director for our team. And it's a pleasure for us to be here with you today. Most of us have been working with the partnership over the past year through preparing your grant application, the work plan, the consortium agreement, the governance structure. It's just been an amazement for us to watch this partnership grow from concept to reality, really going 0 to 60 overnight, it almost seemed. We're proud of our role in that, and we're excited about the opportunity to continue to work with you. What we're going to cover in our presentation is, first I'll introduce our team. I'll give an overview of our understanding and our approach to the project. Then I'm going to turn to my partner, Peter Halliburton, who's our project manager. He'll talk a little bit about how we're going to manage the team and start a discussion of the work program. We'll also call upon three of our team members to talk about specific areas. Elizabeth Sanford will discuss public outreach and engagement on behalf of a large team of consultants. Chris Sinclair will talk about scenario planning. Tim Jackson will talk about implementation. Peter will then come back up to talk a little bit about how we'll manage this process, and I'll close with some thoughts about why I believe we're the right team for this job. Oh, sure, yes, thank you very much. It's a real privilege for me to lead such a distinguished team. As mentioned, we've been working together in support of the partnership for the past year, and we've been working together in projects in South Florida and across the nation, many of us for a long period of time. We've pulled together large and small businesses, individual consultants, universities, nonprofit organizations, and an array of skills, economists, planners, engineers, architects, journalists, to kind of meet all of the needs of this project. Cambridge Systematics is the prime consultant. We're working closely with Kimley Horn and Renaissance Planning Group, both of whom have been part of our team working with the partnership over the last year. Kimley Horn, of course, a lot of planning and engineering work in this region. Stuart Robertson, who's been Kimley's lead, and really a big part of the reason I think that we're all here is that fortunately for him, he's enjoying a well-deserved vacation in Colombia. So he has sent Rick Durr to represent them, and Rick is, just raise your hand over here. Thank you. Renaissance Planning Group as well has been working with us over the past year. Chris Sinclair, their CEO, is with us today. We're very pleased to have AECOM joining us, and that brings the work they've been doing across the region on placemaking and natural systems planning, but also the connection to the work they're doing around the world on thinking about what do the global cities of the 21st century look like. So Tim Jackson is here today, as well as Dave Barth from their local office. We've assembled what I believe is the strongest public involvement team ever pulled together for a project in this region. And Jody Nofsky over here and her team from Content Creators, a specialist in storytelling, combining journalism and web design to get information out about this region. And then three firms I think are known to all of you who are located throughout the region with a long track record of successful public engagement strategies. Stacey Ranieri and her team from the Firefly Group, Cheryl Dickey from Dickey Consulting, and Alicia Gonzalez and her team from MRG. Alicia, unfortunately, is sick today, otherwise we would be here as well. We're very glad to have a number of consortium members as part of the team of the two universities, FIU and FAU, and together they bring access to the work they do that's recognized nationally on data management, visualization, GIS. Dr. Hari Kalva, sitting to the back here from FAU's Center for Advanced Knowledge Enablement, and also Giorgio Tashiev, to the back as well with the Applied Research Center. We're also, through the university, have access to their faculty and students who are researching many of the pressing issues facing the region today, and probably first and foremost of those, climate change. Nicole Hammer, who's the climate change coordinator for FAU, has joined us as well. The Collins Center for Public Policy, known statewide for their work and sort of innovative planning, tackling the tough issues. Phil Bacon and his team are boots on the ground in communities like the Glades communities and Overton, dealing with issues about equity and diversity. then a cadre of individual consultants. I know many of you know Mark Buckbinder. He's in Europe, otherwise he would definitely be here. Gene Scott and Jim Karras, they have been sort of part of the kitchen cabinet, if you will, for the partnership over the last year, and have really become part of my kitchen cabinet as well, so I'm thrilled to have them working with us. And then a number of national experts, particularly Robert Groh, who's the founding director of Envision Utah, one of the nation's most successful regional visioning efforts, and Dr. Jonathan Barnett from the University of Pennsylvania, who's recognized globally for his work on urban design and looking to bring one of his studios down here to do a sort of real-time exercise in this region. This team's come together because we are excited about the future of Southeast Florida. We know this region has changed tremendously over the last 50 years. The population has almost quadrupled to over 6 million. It's gone from being fairly concentrated in Miami-Dade County to spread throughout the region. And we've seen a series of individual communities really grow together into an integrated region. We've seen this region become more and more diverse, to the point that actually what South Florida looks like today is what the nation will look like at the midpoint of this century. And we've seen this region change tremendously. 50 years ago, the first segment of the Turnpike and I-95 were being constructed. FIU was just opening. FAU is on the drawing board. We've seen how the dialogue has changed over time. 50 years ago, we talked about the treasure coast, not the research coast. Our idea of economic stimulus was spring break. And when we talked about the Everglades, it was mostly about how do we get water out so we can develop, so this region can grow. So the dialogue has changed tremendously, and we've seen the region go through many different cycles. The current cycle, of course, is a very difficult one and sort of the worst recession in post-war history. 1 out of 9 people are unemployed today. Key industries have been decimated. We've lost half of the construction jobs in the industry since its peak. Home prices, a historic collapse. The average price of an existing single-family home has dropped almost by half since the peak. Real income in the region after inflation has dropped 5% over the last couple of years, so we're becoming less prosperous, and we're seeing the impacts. 1 out of 7 people living below the poverty line, a growth in homelessness, and a lot of just serious impacts. So it is a time of concern, but we also believe that the future is a time of hope, and that as we look ahead to this region and we look at the resources that are here and the quality of life, and the potential in global trade and the potential in the knowledge industries, that the future of this region could be even brighter than it has been in the past. So our objectives are to work with you to point that region towards the future, to create a shared regional vision and blueprint, and then to build the capacity of the region to actually implement that blueprint over the next 50 years. One of the things that's been fascinating to watch is this began as a federal livable communities program and putting together an application for a regional plan for sustainable development. But the partnership ended up picking the term economic prosperity to describe what you're doing. And first and foremost, that's the challenge today. But we believe they're all linked together. And the part of the path to economic prosperity is creating a way for sustainable development and livable and inclusive communities. We've worked with you to think about the 6 federal livability principles and how they apply to this region. And we've been very excited about your decision to add climate change and resiliency as a 7th overarching principle. We've worked with you to build out the work plan, the 7 tasks that will carry out all the different terms of the grant, and we're familiar with every one of them. But as we look at all the activities and all of the issues, there's a couple that really rise to the surface, and I want to focus really on those. Begins with 3 overarching issues that we think are critical to the future of this region. And the first is the economy. How can our economy become globally competitive? How can we create high-wage, high-value jobs that will position the region for prosperity? And what does the transition for this region look like? Then there's the question of the environment and the region's sense of place, and how do we preserve and enjoy what makes this region so unique, so special, as we grow and develop in the future and as we deal with issues like a changing climate. And then most of all, what's the future for the people of this region? HUD has set out an incredible standard about not just equitable participation, but equitable outcomes from this process. And that's a challenge, of course, in a region that's as diverse as South Florida. But we believe that the diversity of the people is the greatest asset this region has in the long term. If these are the key issues, then what we quickly realize is that the traditional visioning process is not going to fully get us there. And across the country, we've been involved in many of these. A typical visioning process goes through 4 steps. scenario planning exercise, and really focused around where do people live in the region in the future, where will jobs be, how do we connect everything through transportation. And that's a critical issue, of course, in parts of this region. That's a very pressing issue that's very much real time today. But we believe that if this is all this process does, it will not get at the goals that you have set out for it. So we're looking at a different type of process that really would begin with probably the hardest hitting report card this region has ever done, really looking at those key issues: economy, environment, equity. Where are we today, and how do we compare to our competition, not just in this country, but nationally? Then in each of those areas, thinking about what are the alternative futures. What does our economy look like in the future? Is it knowledge-based? Is it trade-based? What happens to some of our historic industries like agriculture? Describing all of those futures and really from them merging together into an integrated view of what does this region want to be as a whole in the future, and then from that into a very detailed action-oriented blueprint. And this is where we come back to all the issues about transportation and housing and urban design, looking at all of them through the lens of, is it going to get us to that vision of a globally competitive economy, sustainable environment, and livable and inclusive communities. As we're doing that technical work, at all times we're keeping an eye, looking ahead to how do we build the capacity of this region. So we're building a vision, but we're also building a partnership and a regional leadership team at the same time. And so we'll be looking through every activity to how do we build a lasting partnership, taking the virtual organization of 200 organizations that you have today and thinking about what does it look like long term and how does it function, and the models across the state we've been involved in across the nation, but something that will uniquely work for this region. We want to think about how do we build the teams of leaders, both involving today's leaders, elected officials and CEOs and nonprofit leaders, but also thinking about who are the leaders tomorrow, who's in high school right now who will be a leader of the future, and how can we get them excited about this today. We want to have the largest public involvement effort that this region has ever had to really inform and engage all segments of the community so that this vision reflects everybody's hopes and dreams. And then be thinking throughout about what do we leave behind: documentation, data, tools that the local governments and the MPOs and the regional councils and private companies can use as a tool to implement. So our approach really looks at this as a matrix. There's a technical activity going through that visioning process, producing the activities that you have laid out in the work plan, but woven throughout the activity of building the Southeast Florida Partnership with you, building that committed regional leadership team, informing and engaging the public at every stage, creating a series of planning and implementation tools that will carry forward, and then at all times thinking about how can we help manage this process and ensure that you're complying with all elements of the grant and growing the funding base for this over time. We believe we can do this because we have done it elsewhere. Our team has worked across the nation on regional visioning processes: Cambridge, Renaissance Planning Group, AECOM, Kimley-Horn, as well as our national faculty have been involved in many of the leading examples of regional partnerships, and many of them have been award-winning. We've also have worked with the federal agencies on different aspects of the Livable Communities program, performance measures, and how do you identify best practices. We also have a unique set of experience at state level in Florida, and I believe there are very few statewide long-range planning and strategic initiatives over the last decade that our team has not been involved in some capacity. I personally have been working with the Florida Chamber Foundation for over a decade on their new Cornerstone research and the Six Pillars process, which is becoming a blueprint for the state's economic future. Over a decade working with Florida DOT on their long-range planning, including the 26th Street Florida Transportation Plan, and then involvement of our team in many regional initiatives, many other statewide initiatives through the Collins Center. But most importantly, our team lives and works and breathes Southeast Florida. We have collectively worked in all 7 counties. We've collectively worked in at least 80 municipalities and counting, ranging from small towns up to large cities. We've worked with a large cross-section of the regional councils, MPOs, economic development organizations, housing partnerships, the list goes on and on. Collectively, we bring a tremendous knowledge base of every part of this region on every issue that will need to be considered as part of this process. It all begins with our team, and I'm going to turn it over to Peter Halliburton, who's our project manager, and Peter will be working very closely with me to manage this process on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you, John. We've made a number of serious commitments, both to HUD and to our partners in this region, And meeting those commitments is going to require a pretty concerted effort and some very focused management. Luckily for me, as our proposed project manager, as you can see from this chart, we've got a great deal of parallel capacity in the 4 key management activities that John indicated, and a great deal of talent. It's going to be my job to manage these people, keep all of the efforts moving in a coordinated direction towards our ultimate goal, and to involve the national faculty in terms of peer review and oversight and guidance, as shown in the top right. I'll also be relying on Jessica Vargas Astaiza, who's here in our office in South Florida and has a great deal of experience in this way. The subject matter experts are the key for me to rely on in terms of managing these 4 elements, and I'd like each of them to come up and share some of their insights on their approach. John?
Thank you. So I'm going to start by just talking about the whole area of partnership, support, and leadership, which is sort of my personal passion. And there's nothing I enjoy better than working with a committee or a group of diverse stakeholders and looking towards a common solution for how we can make a region more prosperous in the future. So our team has experience staffing committees on multiple processes. We're ready to work and recognize all the work that needs to happen to build out the rest of the partnership committee and work groups, to maintain and engage all of the people who are part of the partnership and bring new partners in over time, to work with many organizations across the region as well as the state and nation, and all with an eye towards what does the partnership look like long term. The good news is, I think the hardest part is over already, and we've been working this last several months to build out the initial organizational chart for the partnership and to get the executive committee established. So the basic structure is there. Now it's kind of starting to detail it out, and this is where the committee left off, but I know there's more decisions to be made about what this will look like in the future. Our team can help you staff all the different levels of this process, from the executive committee down to the smallest work group, but we can also work with other consortium and partnership members to help do that, recognizing there's a tremendous expertise already in place throughout the partnership itself. We also can help staff and host meetings, everything from the smallest, most informal roundtable up to the largest regional summit. Our goal in doing all of that is to have as inclusive a process as possible, a equitable decision-making process, and to build consensus around not only the regional vision and the blueprint, but also really a decision-making structure, a level of trust and engagement that this partnership can deal with any tough issue moving forward. And that's been the process that I've taken as we've worked with Florida DOT on many steering committees over the years. That Jim was part of the most recent one that we did with the 2060 plan, but also working with a whole range of committees in other regions. We also recognize, of course, that the committee itself is not enough. It's really that informal network of leaders that really moves a region forward. And probably the greatest lesson learned from regional visions across the nation is they succeed in being implemented where there's a committed team of leaders from the public, private, and civic sectors. And so we will be working throughout to identify, develop, and retain the leaders who can carry this region forward. We know there's a lot of resources in this region, again, for leadership development activities, and a lot of ideas on the table. Regional leadership academies, such as the one we did in Central Florida, training courses, mentoring programs, and what we see our role as a team is helping come in at the beginning, map out the assets today, identify where the gaps are, help you develop a capacity building strategy, and then fill in the parts that we can uniquely fill in over time. In particular, providing access to the national best practices that are from the other projects that we've worked with and the national faculty that are part of our team. Particular issue will be as we look at elected officials, business leaders, and some of the groups that traditionally have not participated in a project of this scale. And also thinking about the local governments that are going to need to implement this over time, many of whom are stretched today from a planning capacity, from a fiscal capacity. How can we make implementation as easy as possible for everybody who will be involved? A big part of how this will work is our national faculty, and so that's why I'm very excited to turn over to our next few speakers. Elizabeth Sanford manages our livability and sustainability practice for Cambridge Systematics and is one of our firm leaders on public engagement. How do you engage the public and pull it into a regional visioning process? And she's worked extensively with the federal agencies and the National Academy of Sciences on best practices in that area. Chris Sinclair from Renaissance Planning Group, sort of nationally recognized for his work in scenario planning, often called upon by Federal Highway, by EPA to do peer reviews of scenario planning processes. And Tim Jackson from AECOM, sort of on anybody's short list of a real national expert on smart growth and placemaking. So I'm going to turn over to Liz to talk about the next part of the work program.
Thank you, John, and thank you very much for the opportunity to interview. It's a pleasure to be here this morning, and a particular privilege to represent our inclusive public involvement team, who we really feel covers Southeast Florida like no one else. As John mentioned, my name is Liz Sanford, and I do lead the Livability and Sustainability Initiative for Cambridge Systematics. I also get involved managing outreach programs for large projects, particularly when they're going to be complex and require the use of numerous tools and techniques, have a lot of moving parts and things of that sort. But I think I'm really just a surface level to a very deep and rich public involvement team that's based here in Southeast Florida. And I just want to acknowledge Phil Bacon and Jody Nofsky, Cheryl Dickey, and Stacy Ranieri, and Alicia Gonzalez, who's not here, because together they covered the geographic diversity of the region from the Treasure Coast to Monroe County. They get at some of the ethnic diversity and have worked in all the communities that are associated with projects here in the region. So we do have an outreach program associated with each one of these pin dots that John mentioned earlier. It's an exciting time for outreach around the nation, because while traditional techniques are still being used, there are a number of new tools and techniques that are available at our disposal. And while ultimately outreach and engagement is about relationships and on-the-ground kind of knowledge, our team is bringing together kind of a blend of this more national, what's happening, what's working, what's not, with what's happening here in Southeast Florida. So our strategy development, with an overarching goal to continue this leadership development and capacity building that John mentioned earlier, will start with the identification of our kind of target audiences, the various urban, suburban, and rural areas, the various communities that need special attention, and the people who have been involved to the point of perhaps fatigue with the process, as well as the people who have never even heard of a regional vision and blueprint. Once we identify the audiences, we'll turn to this kind of toolkit of techniques that are available and start to, in a creative brainstorming sort of way, match up these techniques with the audiences that we're trying to reach. And I'm looking forward to, I hope we get the opportunity to do that, because I think it'll be a very exciting delving into the Southeast Florida context. And finally, we'll integrate all these things into the technical analysis that's done, which is a trick in and of itself to make sure that this input is meaningful and is part of the decision-making process that occurs throughout. I just wanted to touch for a minute and highlight some of the tools and techniques that are available. We see the website and social media as being kind of our platform for information sharing, and are excited to work with Jody and her people at Content Creators to make that a platform that meets and engages people at any level of interest or information, from people who know nothing to people who are very engaged, that you can come in at various levels and use various social media and really get at this notion of many voices in one region. There are a number of traditional techniques, including workshops and attending existing events where people may not come to a public meeting, but you can certainly go to them, as well as large-scale summits, things of that sort. And we hope to really work with the consortium to use media effectively to reach a number of general audiences as well as target audiences. For more focused outreach, we would target our techniques even further, and have recently had great experience working with the school system on a project in El Paso, Texas, where we did a coloring contest that got kids thinking about the project and bringing home their pictures and the information to their parents. We also know that if you go to senior centers and bring coffee and donuts and stuff, it's pretty easy to get a conversation going. And we hope to get a word-of-mouth buzz in neighborhoods and throughout the region as we move forward. Our intent is to build momentum and sustain a strong conversation about the future of Southeast Florida, to help people get excited and engaged and want to participate more. And this dialogue will then be folded into our technical analysis, and I'll turn it over at this point to Chris Sinclair to talk a little bit about that.
So setting context is going to be the first thing we do, and as Liz said, the first thing is to start the conversation, and we've got a lot of experience with this multifaceted region. There's a whole lot of not only people diversity, but there's a lot of differing values across the region, as you all well know. But one of the things we need to do to set context is to collect all the reports and plans that have been done over the last 10, 15 years, and we will do that. We've already started with that. FTP site's been started by Kimley Horn and Associates to move forward. And that'll start letting us know what's going on. Now, interesting thing is we're aware of many of these reports. In fact, we've been involved in a lot of these reports that have been put together. So a lot of these initiatives will not be new to us, and so we can hit the ground running with it. The second aspect of setting context is to collect data. Again, that's already started with the universities who are going to be primarily responsible for doing that. They're part of the consortium. The trick here is to create a common platform and database so that people can easily access data, that the data seem to be common across all of the different parts of the region, so that you really can deal technically with the regional issues that are out there. Data are kind of interesting for us data wonks, but are meaningless unless they're put into context. And the conversations that are going to be had early in the process will start letting us know what the values and expectations of the region are. That gets translated into the regional scorecard, which is part of the work plan. That scorecard will provide meaning, not only for this process, because it will help us understand how each of the outcomes compares to each other, but it provides the region with a way of measuring attainment of its progress towards the vision itself. It's going to have very simple measures for certain audiences. It's going to get into more complex measures for more technical audiences and more specialized information for more interest group-oriented folks. As John set up at the very beginning of this presentation, this is not going to be a traditional visioning scenario planning process. I was involved in one of the first scenario planning processes in the country up in Central Virginia. It was recognized by a Federal Highway Administration and Environmental Protection Agency. Because of that, I got to sit on a panel that helped FHWA put together the framework for scenario planning. I was also involved in peer reviews, as John indicated earlier, to help regions get up to speed with scenario planning. Got to meet and work with Robert Grove quite a bit through that process. But the thing that's really interested me about that is the process has not changed too terribly much from 10 years ago when we started it. And there's been so many changes that have happened in the past 10 years that have added complexity, not to replace the process, but have added complexity that need to be dealt with as you move through the process. And we also heard very loud and clear during the development of the work plan that this cannot be a typical process. It's got to incorporate that, but it has to deal with more. It's got to deal with those tough questions that John put up on the screen earlier. So our proposed approach is really to focus in on those things that drive a region forward. To look at migration patterns. Are they going to change? If they are, how are they going to change? Can the region actually influence change? We're going to be looking at economic development. What can the region do there to change? We're going to be looking at the environment. And how does the environment change the region? John made the comment earlier about the Everglades, and there's a very different mindset right now with regards to the Everglades today than it was 20 years ago. What about equity issues and how they're dealt with and how they may impact the region in the future? So the key here is to collect information about what the drivers are in the region, start looking at those drivers and how they could be modified over time, and then looking at how the region can respond to those drivers. So I'm going to pick on, just for examples, I'm going to pick on economic development and those drivers and what you could be considering as you move forward through the process. First of all, the region may decide more diversity is needed in terms of economic development across the region. Therefore, there needs to be an increase in there would like to be an increase in knowledge-based industries. What does that mean for this region? Is the region ready to do that? If not, what does the region need to do to get prepared for that? And to get fairly specific, it could mean that most of the job growth in the region, if this is the way to go, or way the region will go, will occur in downtown areas, around universities and research areas. That poses some opportunities, but it also poses some challenges, such as, is there going to be enough access into these different places? It also poses the challenge, do we have adequate educational resources in order to make it work? It also poses a challenge, what happens about equity within the region? How does that impact equity across the region? So those are the things we're going to really delve into deeply. The region could also say we want a fundamentally different strategy, which would be let's set ourselves up as a regional multimodal hub, intermodal hub that connects to the rest of the world. How does that influence the region in terms of the job mix and educational requirements of that? How does that deal with the challenges that are out there? So those are the things that we're going to be dealing with as we move forward. And the process that we're going to be using is to use the existing data and models that are in the region, augment those as needed, to understand the implications. So we'll start with, and again, I'm going to pick on the growth and knowledge industries as an example. We'll use the REMI model, which the region is currently using, to understand the kinds of jobs that are going to be developed, the educational requirements, the income mix that will come from those. We're going to compare that against where we are right now in terms of the virtual present, what we get out of the data warehouse. Where are the mismatches? Where does the region need to do to start dealing with some of those mismatches? And those mismatches will then start identifying the responses that we need to make in order to move forward, and each of those responses is going to generate a different set of outcomes. And it's those outcomes that start telling the story of possible futures that are out there for people to consider, and we need to tell those stories about those outcomes in ways that people can understand, and that's why we have a great team to be able to do that, tell the stories. Some other examples of drivers that we'll be looking at on the environmental side: sea level rise, and the possibility of frequent tropical storms, which is a topic of interest right now. And then limits on future water and energy supply. How's that going to impact the region? Ultimately, through this conversation about these outcomes and what looks good, what doesn't look good, we'll build consensus to the vision, as John indicated earlier. That vision has to become part of the regional conversation. If it doesn't, we haven't done what we needed to do. So it's important to tell the story effectively. And then finally, the vision provides a conceptual framework for moving forward, but the real trick is, how do you get it done? So you have to start detailing out for those who are going to be implementing the plan what specifically they need to be doing in order to make it forward. And you also need to start working with localities, one-on-one kind of relationships, in order for them to get in sync with the vision and the path forward.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'm going to talk for just a minute about implementation. And a lot of times, planners think of implementation of a vision means we get in everybody's comp plan and the world is fine and wonderful, we celebrate, and we're done. And all the people sitting here at this table, you have been involved in making things happen in this region for a long time, and you know implementation happens when public money gets invested in something that's built or in a program that's happening. More than that, it happens because private investor puts his or her money at risk to make something happen. Whether that's, I'm renovating my home because I'm going to stay in a long time, or I'm rebuilding five blocks of downtown, like City Place down the street. So here are some examples of thoughts about implementation. This is Miami-Dade County's park system plan that Dave Barth and members of the team helped to develop. It envisions that each piece of the public realm, parks, streets, trails, are a part of building each neighborhood to be a more livable place, and they then generate benefits broader than just recreation benefits. It's starting to be implemented with sets of improvements throughout the county. A big premise of this program was equity, that let's start by making sure we're providing facilities, services to each neighborhood in an equitable way that meets the needs of that culture, that meets the needs of that economic stratus of that neighborhood. Then each of those parks being designed for that specific community that meets its benefits, And it's not just the recreational benefits, but it's going to create a place where more people want to be, where people want to reinvest in their home because their value is rising, and it is creating and helping to create economic prosperity. It's not just an individual park, it happens with trails. It happens with nature centers, investing in environmental improvement that also builds the neighborhood to be a better, more livable place. It happens with every street being termed as a piece of the public realm because it is a place not just for the vehicles, but for people, for industry, for businesses to come and to celebrate. This is skate park in Fort Pierce, Florida. You think of it as a recreational facility. This actually is neighborhood stabilization. This is a program for children, kids at risk, giving them a reason to be in their neighborhood, giving them a place to be when they come after school. It's not a park project. It's not all about infrastructure. This is the Coleman Park neighborhood in West Palm Beach, where Dave Barth worked with this community and looked at a vision, and the result was, first, it's got to be secure, it's got to be safe. The kids have to believe this is a place for them. And once those issues were addressed, then you could invest in infrastructure like the park, the community center, like redeveloping homes. So imagine if every dollar that we're spending across this entire region was looked at as what can it do for economic prosperity? What multiple benefits can I get, even from replacing the water line to beach renourishment? That's the kind of approach to implementation that we need to take as a part of this process. And implementation doesn't start once there's a vision and we get going. It has to be ingrained in the engagement. It has to be ingrained in all the technical work. And most of all, it has to be sustained through continued engagement so that our children are just as excited about the vision as we are. And now Peter's going to wrap up.
Thanks, Tim. I think you've heard and you've seen this morning that we've got a large team of very capable, experienced, and passionate professionals to help you to pull this project together. It'll fall to me to harness all of that energy and make sure that we're all pulling in the same direction within the constraints of the schedule, the budget, and the scope of this project to make sure that we get a quality product that meets the requirements of the grant and meets the requirements of the future of the region. We have in place in our firm and the firms of our team all of the project management tools that we need to manage such a large and complex project and team. And we do this regularly all around the country, and we know we can do this for you. We've demonstrated that to you over the last year, working efficiently and effectively to meet project deadlines, to meet the quality expectations of putting work plan elements together. We're committed to quality control and to providing all of the staffing to supplement the requirements and the capacity of the partnership to date. We have helped you put together the schedule. We understand it thoroughly, and our project, I think we've demonstrated to you this morning, requires no learning curve to move forward on day one.
Thank you. Just to close, we believe we're the right team for this job for 3 reasons. The first is it's the approach that we've developed. It's not your typical visioning approach, but something that's really driven by the key issues of facing the region in the future. Then an approach that's not just a technical exercise, but it's really a process to build the partnership and build the region's capacity over time. Second, we believe we have the right experience. We've assembled firms that are leaders nationally and across the state of Florida on all of these key issues, but also more importantly, a team that has long track record, incredible breadth and depth on every one of these issues in all 7 of these counties. And finally, we believe we're the right team because we have the experience of working with you for the last year. We're ready to start on day one. We are committed to this process. Most of us live and work in this region. We are as committed and excited about the Southeast Florida Partnership, about the regional vision and blueprint, and most importantly, about Southeast Florida as a region as we possibly can be. So we thank you for this opportunity, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Each team received 5 questions You may feel that some of them has already been covered, but before we open it up to the individuals, I was going to give you an opportunity to address all or one of these, and any way you wish.
Oh, anyway, all right. So I guess I'll start with the first question on economic development. And we really, as I mentioned, believe that economic development and prosperity is the heart of this whole process. It's clearly there's a need for a different enhanced approach to the economy here in Southeast Florida. It really begins by that critical look at the strengths and weaknesses of the economy today. What are the industries that could drive the future? A lot of work's been done already, of course, across the region. Most of the counties have recently updated or in the process of updating their target industry studies, so there's a strong foundation to build upon. But looking at what rises up at the regional scale, that would be a truly important driver of the future. And one example, of course, being global trade, where we just completed the work with the Florida Chamber Foundation and DOT looking at the trade and logistics study and how does that become a transformative driver of the whole state's economy in the future, this region really being at the forefront of that. From that economic vision then really leads to associate everything else, because our belief is economic development is more than incentives, it's more than business climate, it's really everything that we've talked about. And you can't have a strong economy without the workforce that will deliver it. You can't have a strong economy without great places, without infrastructure and connectivity. Without a healthy environment. And in this region in particular, the diversity and inclusiveness of all the different populations is an incredibly unharnessed asset. So we'll be looking at a very holistic approach to pull all of that together. The 6 pillars process that we worked on with the Florida Chamber Foundation is, I think, a great starting point, and Palm Beach County has already been implementing that. Some of the other counties are considering it as well. But it's really just one framework, but it's a tremendous amount of research and data and best practices that are available, and so we'll draw on that, but also draw on the work that's happened in this region and on our experience across the country. And I think a lot of it is really a question of alignment. We're involved in the HUD grant in the Heartland as well, and part of the approach we're working on there is how to align the regional vision for the Heartland, those 7 counties, with the economic development strategy for that region, with the comprehensive economic development strategy that the Regional Planning Council is updating, with the 6 pillars process, with the Florida 8 workforce grant that the region's received. And it's almost this incredible opportunity to align all of the stars and harness limited resources to move that region forward. I think the same thing can be done here. The second question, I think we began to touch on the building the foundation. I'll kind of just go back to important to have that foundation of data and information as a starting point. It's to some degree, I think it's true. The regional data warehouse, regional resource library right now exists on the Kimley Horn FTP site, and they've spent a year gathering every report imaginable. And I know it's still more to be done, but beginning with that knowledge base of their reports, pulling it together, looking at what else has been done over time, as we worked in other regions, what we found is as more partners come to the table, more information comes forward. So having a clear way to organize that over time and really make it so that everything that's been used in the past can carry forward. That even within the grant that you have limited resources, and you want to focus data collection and planning on new areas, on gaps, rather than on repeating things that have already been done. I want to see, Chris, anything you want to add on that subject?
Very quickly. We have looked at the, as part of the putting the work plan together, we looked at the existing data across the region. There's a ton of data that's out there. The trick now is to organize that data. I think having universities on the team will help us fully appreciate all the information that's out there. I think the trick now is not necessarily collecting more data, but managing the data that's out there. GIS provides one excellent platform to put all this data on. So as far as pulling it together, we've already been digging into what's out there and what's available, and it's a good data source.
And I would just add to part of the reason that we've invited the universities on the team is that our goal is to design that data warehouse in a way that is accessible to all and is usable as a resource for the whole region moving forward. And so FIU and FAU are, through their GIS capabilities or data management, the Center for Advanced Knowledge and Enablement is a tremendous platform. And so we'll be working with them to figure out how to best organize and move that forward. And Dr. Calva and his team and the others from both the universities will be helping think that whole process through. The third question on public participation, the critical one. Liz, started our discussion of it. I would just say, obviously, to make the public participation engagement process work is absolutely critical to this whole process. And our strategy and our team has been to pull together the national leadership that Liz provides. In terms of what's worked well in different regions across the country, but then a tremendous base within the region of people who do this for a living and know exactly how to pull it off. And I'm actually going to invite Stacy and Cheryl if they want to share a few thoughts, as well as actually our whole team. Well, that would be a quick comment from anybody. Yeah.
Public involvement team to speak, but we found. So I'm so glad.
Well, ironically, I think I met some of you in 1998 when Martin County was going through its sustainable visioning process, and how quickly 12 years goes by. So it's very important to us that we use this team to really reach out to all the different facets of all of the municipalities and the communities and neighborhoods within this region. And as Liz had touched upon, a combination of the more traditional approaches where you're going out into the community to Rotaries and Kiwanis, meeting with the grassroots and the grass tops leadership, but then also really taking the social media element and using that to engage that 20-something and 30-something demographic. We need some succession planning here in terms of this visioning, because we know how long it takes to take the vision and actually see it implemented. And really incorporating all of the unique attributes of the team and how it's spread out across the region. We understand the different nuances, community by community. The Treasure Coast, with its urban, rural, and suburban elements, and some of its differences in terms of how it perceives growth and development compared to some of the southern counties. So I'll let Cheryl just jump in here.
Well, there's really just so much to say, and all of us come with a breadth of experience. And we clearly will realize that with the social media, we'll have a website, and we'll use that technology for interactive conversations with the public. And so, we now have been introduced to webinars and being able to facilitate some actual input from the public based on that. In addition, obviously, we're going to look at the leadership of the community through our leadership programs. All the counties have them. So we'll be getting that information from the leadership. We'll use the school boards and their activity, as has been mentioned before, in terms of bringing the young people in and actually reaching out to parents through them, and the United Ways and all of those entities that now have a lot of social programs to deal with the equity initiatives as well.
Actually, I do think that website is particularly critical, and the whole storytelling aspect of it. That there's a lot of data here, a lot of things that can be derived, but there's an incredibly compelling and enriching story. And so the other thing I would acknowledge Jody Nofsky and Tim Colley and their team from Content Creators, and having a couple of Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists available to help tell this story, I think will be a critical asset moving forward. And I think this is a little bit getting into the next question on, developing and managing the projects of very diverse population groups. But I want to recognize Phil Bacon from the Collins Center and see if Phil might talk a little bit about his experience in some of the communities here, the Glades communities in Overton and so forth, about how do you particularly reach, some of those groups that often have not been at the table at an exercise like this.
Well, thank you very much. We've had the pleasure of working with communities that heretofore just have not been considered or contacted. And the important thing, I think, about reaching these communities is to go to where they actually meet and gather. There's no substitute for the work that you have to do on the ground in terms of actually getting out and meeting people. We find that a lot of people in these communities are very resistant to people that come in from the outside. And essentially, what we're talking about is a long-term process that involves relationship building with various individuals as well as community groups, and allowing them an opportunity to express themselves and their interest, as opposed to coming into those communities with a preset number of solutions.
I'll just close with a thought on that one with a thought Mark Buckbinder would share if he was here, but it's thinking about who are people who are the thought leaders in the region who we often don't think about inviting to an event. But Mark's challenge just was, if you can get the beauticians talking about this, if you can get the bartenders talking about this, who do people look to in their community, the pastors, the teachers, who can just help share that vision and feed information back. Phone apps. Oh yes, Jody's signaling the phone app. But being ubiquitous, how do we make the most use of the social media of just doing this in a different way for the whole region? The next question on participation in other HUD-funded initiatives, I'll kind of start and then kind of quickly look to some of our partners here. But we're involved in the Regional Sustainable Communities Grant for the Heartland, the 7-county area just adjacent, led by the Central Florida Regional Planning Council, and have been helping design their work program, and they're getting ready to launch as well. I know Tim and Chris and their firms are also involved in some similar initiatives.
So ACOM was just started work for Houston Galveston, doing the community engagement piece. That before they go to
Well, since it's a fairly new program, I'm not sure anybody's really up and speed. Houston may be as far along as anybody right now. But we have been active in putting together work plans, as John mentioned earlier, not only here, helping this region put both the application together as well as the work plan together. We work with Knoxville in putting together their work plan, as well as right now we're working with the Roanoke region putting their work plan together.
Okay, the next question, I think this is my favorite. How do you deal with a problem sub-consultant? That never happens. Actually, you know what I do? I call Peter, because he's our project manager.
Thanks, John. I'll answer the question in two parts. First, to address my experience and how we resolved it, and then perhaps as importantly, or more importantly, what we do regularly to avoid such a problem. So luckily, I've had little experience in this regard. I have to think back quite a few years, and one that comes to mind was a project here in the region, in Miami-Dade County actually, where the project we were working on was based on a hypothesis. And once we got into the project and began the initial data analysis, it was clear that that hypothesis should shift and had shifted. And based on the scope of work that we used in the contract, one of our sub-consultants wasn't really on board with the flexibility to shift to a new focus. And so what we did to address that was to open dialogue, to explain the issues, and that really is usually at the heart of such a problem, is a lack of understanding of what we're trying to achieve. We drew on personal relationships, company relationships, and just information sharing to correct the situation. But what we do regularly to avoid such a situation is to really focus on the upfront work, on what is that scope of work? Does it meet the long-term goal? Is it reasonable in terms of time frame and budget? What flexibilities do we need to build into it? And then build a very strong contract. And our firm has a very strong contracts department that is great backup to us to prevent that sort of situation from happening. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, and what I would add as a project director is, of course, we would have communication with you all at all times, so we can be aware of any issues and deal with them quickly. And obviously, we're not going to take any unilateral action without your involvement with a major issue with a sub-consultant. But as Peter said, these are for us are very few and far between when we have that proactive communication. The other issue, of course, is we built the team with some redundancy in mind, so that we can. If we're having some delivery issues of one sub-consultant or somebody else who may be able to step into that role, so there's not a delivery in service.
If you want to wrap up, then there'll be time for questions from the TRC.
Oh, okay, great. Just, I do want to just touch on the question about dealing with new members and consortium members, and we've already have several on the team, the universities, the Collins Center, content creators, others who are members of the partnership. And our commitment is to work with you to identify at all times, is there somebody on the consortium, on the partnership who could be doing this, and leverage them. And just one example where, you know, when we worked with my region on the How Shall We Grow process, you know, we oversaw and coordinated work of a whole range of partners. Actually, I don't think anybody was under contractual relationship to us, but we were often reviewing people's work, other consultants, work coming out of the district office from DOT, you know, and the Regional Planning Council, and it was just a very collaborative effort. So that's our commitment, is we're part of a team, we're collaborating, and we're making the most of what everybody has to offer.
Thank you.
Okay.
Michael, I stopped with you. Do you have any questions?
Two, actually. One of the one I'm going to ask each of the...
Yes. And if you're answering, you need to get to the mic, too.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
One question I didn't get to ask of the previous presenters, but I'll be asking of all of them, just if you could just clarify a little bit, talk about the Cambridge's previous regional planning and visioning experience where your firm, Cambridge, was the prime. In other words, an example of something like this somewhere in the country where Cambridge was the prime consultant or the lead. So I just want that clarified. And the second question I'll ask also is a little bit more information about the scenario model that you'll be using outside of REMI. I understand REMI, but there are other elements that need to be sort of modeled. And but those are the two questions I have.
Well, I guess I would start answering the first question by saying I don't think there has been anything truly like this anywhere in the country because of the diversity of the region and the range of issues you're looking at. You know, that said, you know, we've been involved in a number of regional planning exercises, some for MPOs, some for regional planning councils, private groups. You know, in Florida, the How Shall We Grow, we were the prime for a part of the work doing the policy and technical support and in coordinating across many different consultants. If it had been contracted in a different way, we may have actually had responsibility for everybody. You know, I looked at some of the work. You know, we've done, you know, very large-scale regional transportation plans for a lot of major metropolitan planning organizations. Atlanta. Atlanta, one example, at New York, Chicago, you know, Bay Area, kind of pulling together similar issues at a similar scale.
We do have interesting experience in Atlanta, which is my home base, where I was the principal MPO planner back in the mid-90s when they were one of the first regions of the country to do a visioning process, and that's met with quite a bit of, you know, it's had its pros and cons, probably more than anything, lessons learned. And Atlanta just, in their last, it was their long-range transportation plan update, but it grew into become much more of a regional sustainability plan and a visioning process, comprehensive with extensive town hall meetings. We have been the prime on-call consultant assisting with that. It's just recently been adopted. And
Okay.
yes.
That's fine.
Part two to the question, so.
The other
Oh,
question,
yeah,
though, I guess because we're going to run out of time, so the other question I had was
Well,
just,
we have other people that want to ask questions.
yeah. Well, I didn't get to ask one last time, so I get two. You get two. Just about the scenario model.
All right,
That's it.
Yeah. So as with regards to the scenario model, we actually put together a model called Core Plan for Federal Highway when we did this work for Central Virginia. It's amazing comparing notes with some of the other models out there, very similar the way it works. It's a place-based model. Kind of go down and look at the grid cells, and you allocate places to those and populate the data that way. As you populate things, you start getting information about sensitivities to certain things, such as air quality, VMT that's being generated. We double check that with a regional travel demand model just to make sure we understand what's going on. So that's the platform we use.
Randy Whitfield, Palm Beach County MPO.
You talked a little bit about infrastructure, and what do you see as the role of existing and planned infrastructure as far as a driving force or a limiting factor in developing your plan?
You know, I would say it's absolutely critical. And particularly when you start with that economic perspective, it's all about how do we connect the region together and how do we connect to external markets, so that different scales of connectivity, the seaports and the airports and the role they play supporting the international trade and the visitor flows, but also within the region, how do we connect all the counties and cities together, so that they're becoming an increasingly integrated economy. And of course, we recognize the challenges today, with congestion on the highway system, with limited options, funding needs. It's a pretty serious mix of issues. But our experience has been in other regions that, from a long-range perspective, to really implement change in a region, the two biggest levers are usually conservation and transportation. And if you get those two right, then the rest tends to fall into place. Peter, anything you want to add from?
I'm going to go down the list, the road. Julia Trevarthen from Boca Raton Planning Department.
Hi. What's your strategy at this point for how to best engage municipalities in this much larger than a bread box kind of process?
Great question. I think the partnership is a starting point, but I know not all the municipalities are members at this point. There's probably a committee structure or some type of working group to pull in the municipalities on an ongoing basis, maybe tapping into leagues of cities that exist or other existing organizations. Really making it very relevant to the municipalities of where do they participate, or given limited time, where they can have the most impact, and how can they keep informed on the pieces they don't have time to participate in. But we found in other regions, again, it's committee structures, it's regular reporting of information, it's pushing information out, often going to them and sitting with them and getting their input early on, then bringing them back together. The Central Florida process began some informal working groups. By the end, there was a joint committee representing one representative of each of the 7 counties and one municipal representative from each county that was identified to represent the others in that county. And we worked with them to get consensus on an overall policy framework that they all took back to their fellow municipalities for implementation. And that particular policy compact has been adopted by all 7 counties, and well over 2/3, probably close to 80% at this point of the municipalities since that vision was adopted. So our goal is to accomplish something like that.
Lois Bush, DOT, District 4.
You were talking about the regional data warehouse and collecting existing data. A big issue for the region are projections, population and otherwise, and there's so many plans being prepared, various planning horizons. It would be a big benefit to the region, arguably, to have kind of a common conversation on that. How is that part of what you're talking about in terms of the regional data warehouse?
I think it would need to be, and it's obviously a very timely time with the census coming out and with rethinking a lot of those projections. So we would look for a collaborative process. What's fantastic here, of course, is the regional councils have such resources already committed to that area. So how do we apply the work of Dick Ogborn, for example, to move forward, but also a fresh look, not just the population projection, but everything else that's projected.
Yeah, and I think the big challenge there, Lois, is going to be getting the forecast horizon out far enough so that they go beyond Bieber. The big challenge you're all going to have, and it happens in every region that we've ever worked for, is those Bieber projections are out there for each county. How realistic are those, given the land capacity of those counties? How much shifting can take place? There's a lot of jockeying for position in terms of the allocation of the population. So that will be one of the tricky parts to get through in this process, make no doubt about it.
Henry Crespo, last question.
So you have a broad team of participants. What is the makeup of your local team as it relates to the Southeast and region? So how many out-of-state team participants? Percentage that out, what would you say? 70% are local as it relates to Florida, or are you mostly national groups?
I would say, I haven't counted it up that way, but I would probably 90% local. Every one of our, with the exception of a couple of the national faculty like Robert Groh, like Dr. Barnett, everybody else is based in Southeast Florida or has an office here, and a lot of the staff who will be primarily carrying this out are based in this region, and then drawing in the national experts to provide that expertise where needed.
Subsidiary office or their corporate office here?
In the case of Cambridge Systematics, it's a subsidiary office, but running the whole planning practice for Florida out of this Fort Lauderdale. AECOM has several offices in the region. Renaissance Planning Group has an office. Kimley Horn. So most of these firms have large and very active offices in this region.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate your coming.